The diamond caught light before it caught meaning. It arrived in a blue velvet box on a Tuesday evening, delivered not with ceremony but with the casual affection of someone who had stopped at the jeweler between meetings. He placed it on the kitchen counter beside her phone while she was stirring pasta, and when she turned, he was already loosening his tie, smiling in that way that had once made her heart skip but now simply registered as normal. The necklace was delicate, a single teardrop diamond on a thin white gold chain, the kind of piece that whispered rather than announced. She held it to the light and watched it fracture into tiny rainbows across the ceiling. He fastened it around her neck while the water boiled over, his fingers warm against her skin, and she thought, as she often did in those days, that this was what contentment looked like. Ordinary, unremarkable, safe. She wore it to dinner that Friday. She wore it to her sister's birthday lunch. She wore it in the mirror each morning, learning its weight against her collarbone, the way it settled into the hollow of her throat. Within days, it had become part of her, the way certain objects do when they are given with love, or what feels like love, which at the time seemed like the same thing. This isn't fiction. This is how trust disappears, one small detail at a time. They had been together for 6 years, married for 3. Their life together had developed the comfortable topology of routine. Coffee made in silence at dawn, his hand on her shoulder as he passed behind her chair. Separate but adjacent existences that intersected at meals and in bed and in the small negotiations of domestic life. They were not unhappy. She would have said that on any given Tuesday, with confidence. They had weathered the usual storms, his mother's illness, her promotion that required longer hours, the unspoken grief of a miscarriage 2 years prior that had changed something fundamental between them, something neither could name. But they had survived. They were surviving still. The necklace felt like proof of that. Their home was a 2-bedroom Craftsman in Silver Lake with original hardwood floors that creaked in specific places, by the bathroom door, near the kitchen threshold, in the hallway outside their bedroom. She had learned the geography of those creaks the way she had learned everything about their shared life, through repetition, through the slow accumulation of ordinary days. The house smelled like the lavender soap she kept in bowls throughout the rooms, like the coffee he made too strong every morning, like the particular mustiness of old wood and new paint coexisting in imperfect harmony. She loved that house, had loved watching him move through it in the early morning darkness, the shape of him familiar even in shadow, had loved the sound of his keys dropping into the ceramic bowl by the door, the ritual of his return each evening, had loved the way their routines had calcified into something that felt permanent, unshakable, true. The necklace became part of that landscape. She touched it absently throughout the day, during conference calls, while reading emails, standing in line at the grocery store. It was a talisman, she thought, evidence that he still saw her, still wanted to surprise her with beauty, still believed their marriage was worth these small gestures of adornment. She didn't notice the first photograph immediately. It appeared in her feed late one evening while he was in the shower, posted by someone named Gabrielle, a mutual acquaintance, a colleague from his firm, a woman she'd met perhaps twice at holiday parties, someone whose face registered as vaguely familiar but inconsequential. The photo showed Gabrielle at a restaurant, laughing, her head tilted back, and there against her chest, catching the amber light of wherever she was, hung a necklace, a delicate teardrop diamond, a thin white gold chain. She stared at it for what felt like minutes, but was probably seconds. Her thumb hovered over the screen. The bathroom door opened and steam rolled into the bedroom, and she locked her phone and placed it face down on the nightstand, the image already burning itself into permanent memory. It could be a coincidence. Of course it could. Jewelry designers made dozens, hundreds, thousands of identical pieces. Mass production was a thing. She told herself this while brushing her teeth, while climbing into bed, while listening to him breathe beside her in the dark. Her hand moved to her own throat, finding the diamond there, and she thought about clasps and chain links and the particular way light fractures through cut stone. Identical, but not necessarily singular, not necessarily meaningful. She didn't mention it. The next morning, she stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, studying the necklace with forensic attention, the way the chain caught at a slight angle before the clasp, the microscopic asymmetry in the setting, barely visible even when she leaned close. She photographed it from several angles, then deleted the photos, feeling foolish. What was she documenting? Evidence of what? She wore it anyway. And that Friday, when they met friends for drinks, She watched him across the table and wondered if there was something she had failed to notice. A distraction in his gaze, a particular way he checked his phone, some small behavioral shift that should have registered as warning. But he was exactly as he always was. Attentive, but not overly so. Present, but slightly distant, the way people become when comfort replaces intensity. He ordered her favorite wine without asking. He laughed at the right moments. He placed his hand on her knee beneath the table. Every gesture was correct. Every gesture was empty of information. Their friends, Marcus and Jenny, a couple they'd known since college, talked about their upcoming trip to Portugal, and she nodded and asked questions and made all the appropriate sounds while her mind circled back again and again to that photograph, to Gabrielle's throat, to the impossible coincidence of identical jewelry. When Jenny complimented the necklace, she heard herself say, "Thank you, it was a gift," and watched him smile across the table, proud, as though he had done something worthy of pride. By the time the leaves changed, not the dramatic transformation of New England autumns, but the slow, barely perceptible browning of California fall, she had developed a new habit. Each evening, after he fell asleep, she would open Instagram and scroll until she found Gabrielle's feed. The woman posted often, artfully styled coffee cups, scenic hiking trails, dinner plates arranged with the studied casualness of someone who understands angles and light. And in perhaps a third of these images, worn with the unconscious ease of someone who had been given something precious, was the necklace. The same necklace. She was certain now. Not similar, the same. She had memorized every detail of her own, the slight cant of the setting, the way the chain kinked minimally just before the clasp, the specific brilliance of the stone. And there, photograph after photograph, was its mirror. Its twin. Its impossible duplicate. She began to construct explanations, each more elaborate than the last. Perhaps he had purchased two, intending to return one. Perhaps there had been a promotion, a buy-one situation she was unaware of. Perhaps Gabrielle had admired hers and bought her own. These narratives felt thin even as she assembled them, but they were preferable to the alternative, which pressed against her consciousness like a hand against glass. Visible, insistent, undeniable. In those weeks, she noticed other things, small things. The way he had started keeping his phone face down, always. The new passcode. She had glanced over his shoulder once while he unlocked it, and the numbers were different, rearranged into a sequence she didn't recognize. The increased frequency of late meetings, evening work events, overnight trips to San Francisco that used to happen quarterly and now seemed to occur every other week. None of it was conclusive. All of it was suggestive. She found herself performing small investigations, checking the mileage on his car and calculating whether it matched the distances he claimed to have driven, noting the scent that sometimes clung to his collar. Not perfume exactly, but something floral and unfamiliar, something that didn't belong to their home or their life. She hated herself for this surveillance, for the person she was becoming. But she couldn't stop. The not knowing had become unbearable, a weight that pressed against her chest every waking moment. The receipts were in his desk drawer. She told herself she was looking for something else, tax documents, the warranty for the dishwasher, anything that would justify the feeling of wrongness that had taken root in her chest. But her hands moved, with purpose, bypassing folders and envelopes until they found the small leather folio where he kept financial records. The credit card statement was 3 months old, 2 identical charges, separated by 3 days. Same jeweler, same amount, same everything. She sat on the floor of his office for 20 minutes, the paper shaking slightly in her hands. The afternoon light came through the window at a sharp angle, the same light that now seemed to illuminate everything differently. The room, the marriage, the past 6 years. 2 necklaces, 2 women, 1 man who had stood in her kitchen and fastened a chain around her neck while pretending it meant something singular. The receipt included details she hadn't wanted to see but couldn't look away from. The first purchase was dated August 14th, a Thursday. She remembered that day. He had texted her that he'd be home late, something about a client dinner. The second purchase was August 17th, Sunday. They had gone to the farmer's market that morning, had spent the afternoon reading in the backyard, had made dinner together. At some point during that ordinary, unremarkable day, he had slipped away. To the drugstore, she thought he'd said, or maybe the hardware store, and bought a second necklace. An identical necklace. And 3 days later, on that Tuesday evening, he had given one to her, which meant the other had already been given to Gabrielle. or would be given soon after. She didn't know which was worse, being first or being second, being the wife or being the other woman, being the one he came home to or being the one he left home for. That night at dinner, takeout Thai food eaten at the coffee table while a documentary played unwatched on the television, she almost said something. The words assembled themselves in her throat. I know about the necklace. I know about Gabrielle. But what emerged instead was, this is good, gesturing vaguely toward her curry, and he nodded and said, yeah, they never disappoint. And the moment passed, and she understood that she was choosing silence, that she was complicit now in whatever theater they were performing. The days that followed had a strange, submerged quality, as though she were watching her life through water. She went to work, she made dinner, she asked him about his day and listened to his answers, which contained nothing revelatory, nothing that confirmed or denied what she now knew. She wore the necklace because taking it off would require explanation, and she wasn't ready for that, wasn't ready for the conversation that would follow, the confrontation that would crack open their carefully maintained surface and expose whatever rot had been growing beneath. But wearing it became its own form of torture. She felt it against her skin, like accusation, like evidence, like the physical manifestation of her own willful blindness. Every time she caught her reflection, in windows, in bathroom mirrors, in the dark screen of her phone, she saw it. There, glinting, mocking her with its false promise of singular affection. She started sleeping poorly, would wake at 3, at 4, at 5 in the morning and lie there in the darkness, listening to him breathe, wondering where his mind went when he slept. Did he dream of her or of Gabrielle, or of some impossible fusion of the two? Did he wake and feel guilt, or did he simply roll over and continue sleeping? The untroubled sleep of someone who had successfully compartmentalized his life into tidy, non-intersecting segments. Some weeks later, his phone buzzed on the bathroom counter while he was in the shower. She hadn't meant to look. Or perhaps she had. Perhaps every action in those days was deliberate, even when it felt accidental. The message was from Gabrielle. Thank you for last night. I'm still thinking about it. The phone went dark in her hand. The shower continued running. Steam crept across the mirror, erasing her reflection slowly, and she set the phone down exactly where she'd found it and walked out of the bathroom and sat on the edge of the bed and waited for something inside her to break. It didn't. Not yet. What she felt instead was a cold, perfect clarity. Last night, he had told her he was meeting colleagues for drinks after work, that he might be home late. She had eaten dinner alone, leftover soup from the refrigerator, and watched a movie she couldn't remember now. He had come home around 11, smelling like wine and the night air, and had kissed her forehead before brushing his teeth. She had pretended to be asleep, and all the while, apparently, he had been with Gabrielle. Doing what, exactly? She didn't let herself imagine the specifics. The broad strokes were devastating enough. She stopped wearing the necklace the next day. He noticed at breakfast. She saw his eyes move to her bare throat, saw the question form and then dissolve unasked. She offered nothing, and for the first time in their marriage, she felt powerful in her silence, felt that by withholding explanation, she was finally balancing the scales of all he had withheld from her. You're not wearing it, he said finally, carefully, as though testing the temperature of water before diving in. No. Did something happen to it? No. He waited. She poured herself more coffee, added cream, stirred slowly. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, and she realized she liked it there, liked watching him struggle, liked knowing something he didn't know she knew. It was petty, perhaps, but it was also the first thing that had felt like power in weeks. Are you okay? He asked. Fine, she said. Why, you seem distant lately. The hypocrisy of this nearly made her laugh. Do I? Yeah, I feel like you're somewhere else. I'm right here, she said, meeting his eyes. I'm always right here. Something flickered across his face, recognition, maybe, or fear, but he only nodded and finished his coffee and kissed her cheek before leaving for work. And she stood in the kitchen after he'd gone and thought about all the ways people can be present and absent simultaneously, faithful and unfaithful, honest and deceptive, loving and cruel. The confrontation, when it came, was not dramatic. It happened in their kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, autumn light slanting through the window above the sink where she was washing lettuce for a salad neither of them would eat. He was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone. and she said very calmly, without preamble, "I saw the receipt for her necklace." His hand stopped moving. He didn't look up immediately, and in that pause, 3 seconds, maybe 4, she understood that he had been waiting for this, that some part of him wanted to be caught, wanted the performance to end as much as she did. "It's not what you think," he said, which was such a precisely terrible response that she almost laughed. "Then what is it?" He set his phone down, looked at her. His face was tired, she realized. When had he started looking so tired? "It's complicated." "No," she said. "Actually, it's very simple. You gave me a necklace, and you gave her the same necklace. That's not complicated. That's just cruel." The word hung between them. He flinched slightly, which gave her no satisfaction. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said, and this too was exactly what she expected him to say. The precise combination of apology and deflection that admitted nothing while seeming to admit everything. "Are you sleeping with her?" The question was so direct it seemed to surprise them both. He opened his mouth, closed it, finally. "I don't know what we're doing." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have." She turned off the water, dried her hands on a dish towel, folded it precisely, hung it back on its hook. These small domestic rituals felt suddenly absurd, but she completed them anyway, because what else was there to do? "How long?" "Does it matter?" "Yes." 6 months. Maybe 7 months. She calculated backward. Through summer, through her birthday, through the weekend they'd spent in Carmel, where he'd seemed particularly attentive, particularly affectionate, and which she now understood as compensation, as guilt manifesting as tenderness. She thought of all the dinners, all the mornings, all the casual intimacies that had occurred while he was splitting himself between 2 lives, 2 women, 2 identical necklaces given with what? She had to ask herself now, what intention? What had he been trying to prove? "Why did you give us the same necklace?" The question came out quieter than she intended, barely above a whisper, but it was the only question that mattered. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was soft, almost inaudible. "I don't know. I think I wanted both of you to have something beautiful. I think I was trying to make it equal, somehow." "Equal," she repeated, and the word was so absurd, so cosmically misguided, that she did laugh then, a short, sharp sound that contained no humor. "You thought giving us the same necklace would make this equal?" "I know how it sounds." "Do you? Do you actually?" He looked away. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking. Somewhere a car door slammed. Life continued in its ordinary way, while theirs collapsed in this kitchen, over lettuce and dish towels and the ruins of what used to be called trust. "Do you love her?" she asked, and was surprised to find she genuinely wanted to know the answer. "I don't know." "Do you love me?" "Yes." He said it without hesitation, and she believed him, which was somehow worse than if he had lied. "Then how—" She stopped, started again. "How do you do both? How do you come home to me every night and wake up next to me every morning and pretend everything is normal while you're giving someone else the same gifts, the same attention, the same version of yourself that I thought belonged only to me?" "I didn't plan this," he said. "It just happened." "No, you chose it every time you saw her, every time you lied about where you were, every time you bought a necklace and decided to buy 2. Those were choices. This didn't just happen to you like weather." He had no response to that. She watched him standing there, this man she had known for 6 years, had loved for 6 years, had built a life with, and realized she was looking at a stranger. Or perhaps she was looking at him clearly for the first time, seeing not the person she had wanted him to be, but the person he actually was. Someone capable of dividing himself so thoroughly that he could maintain 2 relationships simultaneously, could give identical gifts without apparent irony, could look her in the eye and lie through omission every single day. "I think you should leave," she said. "Where would I go? I genuinely don't care. Can we talk about this? Can we try to figure this out?" "There's nothing to figure out. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." He left. She heard him moving through the house, the bedroom, the closet, the sound of a duffel bag being zipped, and then the front door opened and closed, and she was alone in a silence that felt both devastating and mercifully clean. In the quiet that followed, she began to notice things she hadn't before. The house, which had always felt full even when she was the only one in it, now felt accurately empty. She moved through rooms that seemed larger, echoing. She slept on her side of the bed and woke to find the other side untouched, and this absence felt less like loss and more like honesty. Here, finally, was evidence that matched reality. The first few days were the hardest. She would reach for her phone to text him something mundane, a funny sign she'd seen, a question about whose turn it was to pay the water bill, and remember that he no longer occupied the space in her life where those small communications belonged. She would cook dinner and set out 2 plates before remembering she only needed one. She would wake in the night reaching for warmth that wasn't there and find only cool sheets and emptiness. Her sister called. Her mother called. She told them both a version of the truth that was sufficiently complete without being entirely vulnerable. Yes, they were separating. No, she didn't want to discuss the details. Yes, she was fine. And she was fine mostly in the way people are fine when they've been holding their breath and can finally exhale, even if the air burns on the way out. Her friends tried to help. Jenny brought over wine and frozen pizzas and sat with her on the couch, not requiring conversation but simply existing in the same space, offering the comfort of witness. Marcus sent long texts, checking in, offering to help with anything she needed, moving furniture, changing locks, burning his belongings in effigy. She appreciated their care, even as she found herself unable to fully accept it. There was something about grief that required privacy, she discovered. Something that resisted the well-meaning intrusions of people who loved her, but couldn't understand the specific texture of her loss. Because what she had lost wasn't just him. It was the story she had been telling herself about their life together. It was the belief that she knew someone completely, that love was transparent, that trust once earned remained earned. She had lost her faith in her own perception, her ability to read the signs, her confidence that she could tell the difference between truth and performance. She sold the necklace. Not immediately. It took her 3 weeks to dig it out from the jewelry box where she'd hidden it, to look at it one final time in the light and remember how it had felt against her skin when it still meant something other than betrayal. She took it to a consignment shop downtown, accepted their offer without negotiation, and walked out 20 minutes later with a check she would never cash. Because what mattered wasn't the money, but the act of removing it from her life, of refusing to carry evidence of his deception against her body any longer. Some months later, she saw Gabrielle in a coffee shop near the office. The woman didn't notice her, was busy at a table with her laptop and a complicated-looking beverage. And she stood in line and ordered her coffee and left without introducing herself or creating a scene. Because what would she say? What accusation or recrimination would make any difference? Gabrielle wore no necklace. She looked tired too, around the eyes, in the set of her mouth. And she understood then, standing on the sidewalk with her coffee, that this woman was not her enemy. Neither of them were villains. They had both simply made the mistake of loving someone who had confused generosity with multiplication, who had thought love could be split evenly, like assets in a divorce. Years can pass inside a single evening, but they can also pass outside it. She rebuilt her life in small increments. New routines, new friends, a new apartment with light that came from different angles at different times of day. She dated occasionally, cautiously, always watching for the tells she had missed before. The slight distance in someone's eyes, the particular way they checked their phone, the gap between their words and their actions. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday, which felt appropriate somehow. Tuesdays were always the day when significant things happened quietly, the necklace, the end, everything in between. She signed the papers in a conference room with gray walls and fluorescent lighting, and when it was done, she walked out into afternoon sunshine and realized she felt nothing. Not relief, not sadness, not anger. Just the flat, neutral acknowledgement that something that had once been alive was now legally, officially dead. She never saw him again after that day in the kitchen. He sent emails occasionally, long, apologetic things that tried to explain what had happened and why, that attempted to parse blame and motive and chronology. She read the first few, then stopped. There was nothing in them she needed. No explanation would reorganize the past into something acceptable. No apology would restore what he had broken when he bought 2 necklaces and pretended each one was singular. What she learned, slowly, was that betrayal reveals not just what was done, but what was never really there. The love she had believed in, the safe, ordinary, unremarkable love, had been partially fiction, a story they had agreed to tell each other while other stories unfolded in the margins. And perhaps that was the real loss. Not him, but the narrative, the belief that she could know someone completely, that trust was something earned and kept rather than something fragile and contingent. Always one receipted purchase away from collapse. She developed new rituals, morning coffee on her balcony, watching the city wake up. Evening walks through her neighborhood, learning its rhythms. Weekly calls with her sister, who had stopped at asking if she was okay, and started simply sharing the mundane details of her own life, which was its own form of healing. She took up pottery, joined a book club, adopted a cat who slept on what used to be his side of the bed, and seemed to understand, in that knowing way cats have, that she needed something living and warm to offset the cold space of absence. On the first anniversary of the day he gave her the necklace, she didn't mark it consciously, but her body remembered, the way bodies do. She found herself thinking about Gabrielle, wondering if she still saw him, or if that relationship too had collapsed under the weight of its own deception. Wondering if she ever thought about the other woman who had worn the same diamond, felt the same weight against her throat, believed the same lie about singularity. She hoped Gabrielle was okay. She hoped Gabrielle had left him, or that he had revealed himself to be what he was. Someone who loved the idea of love more than the reality of it. Someone who wanted to be everything to everyone and ended up being nothing to anyone. She hoped Gabrielle had learned, as she was learning, that some gifts are not gifts at all, but contracts written in a language you don't understand until it's too late to renegotiate the terms. She still thinks about the necklace sometimes. Not his betrayal, not the relationship, not the specific cascade of lies and revelations, but the object itself. How something so small and beautiful could carry such weight. How a gift could become evidence. How love could be both genuine and insufficient. How someone could hurt you, not out of malice, but out of their own confusion about what they wanted, who they were, what they believed they deserved. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the only sound is her own breathing in a bed she no longer shares, she thinks about the moment she saw that photograph. Gabrielle laughing, the diamond catching light, the terrible recognition that crept across her skin like cold water. That was the moment everything changed, though she didn't know it yet. That was the last second when she could have told herself it meant nothing, could have looked away, could have chosen ignorance over knowledge. She never regrets looking, because the truth, however painful, was preferable to the alternative, which was living inside a story where she was loved while being unaware she was being shared, where a gift against her throat was also a gift against another woman's throat, where the same light fractured through the same stone in two different lives, meaning everything and nothing simultaneously. The peace she feels now isn't the absence of pain. It's something harder won and more honest. The understanding that she survived something she once would have thought would destroy her. That she is whole, even broken. That love was real even when it was divided. That she can see clearly now, even if what she sees includes all the ways she was blind before. She doesn't wear necklaces anymore, not out of trauma, but out of preference. She has learned to value what cannot be duplicated, what cannot be purchased in pairs, what exists singularly or not at all. Her throat is bare, and this feels right. Nothing between her skin and air, nothing catching light that isn't already hers. On difficult days, when the loneliness feels sharp and particular, she reminds herself that she chose truth over comfort, clarity over illusion, that she walked away from someone who had split himself into pieces and expected her to accept a fraction and call it whole. That she had loved completely, without reservation, without division, and even though that love had not been returned in kind, she had still loved well. And that, she thinks, is worth something, maybe everything. I never stopped trusting. I just learned what trust actually costs.